Why attraction is often felt then missed. There is a particular kind of confusion that happens when someone clearly feels something for you but never brings it to the surface. Nothing is said outright. Nothing obvious happens. And yet, something keeps pulling you back to the same moments, replaying them in your head, wondering if you imagined it. As Dr. Sophia explains, this confusion is one of the most common psychological experiences around attraction, because the human mind looks for certainty while attraction often moves in silence. Most people assume attraction announces itself. In reality, it often shows up quietly in the way distance changes, in how attention sharpens, in small shifts that do not look important until you know what you are looking at. Once you notice these shifts, it becomes very hard to miss them again, because your awareness has been trained to recognize patterns instead of waiting for declarations. Sometimes it begins with physical space. You are standing somewhere together, a bar, a room, a crowded place, and nothing dramatic happens. But over time, objects move. A bag gets shifted. A drink ends up closer. Someone slides slightly, supposedly to make room. And the space that opens just happens to be exactly where you could stand. On the surface, it looks accidental. But pay attention to where things end up, not why they moved. Distance rarely rearranges itself by chance. Human bodies are very deliberate when attraction is present, even when the mind pretends otherwise. What matters most is what happens if that space is taken. When closeness is welcomed instead of corrected, that tells you the movement was not about tidying or convenience. It was about proximity. And once that pattern starts, it usually shows up in another way that becomes easier to recognize with experience. Attention begins to move from conversation to comfort. You do not say you are tired. You do not mention being sore or distracted, but somehow it is noticed anyway. Someone suggests switching places because of a draft. Recommends food without being asked. Adjusts the environment before you even register that something is off. At first, this can feel like simple kindness. But there is a difference between politeness and awareness. Politeness responds to what is said. Awareness responds to what is felt. When someone is tracking how your body feels moment to moment, it means their attention is already anchored on you. That kind of awareness is not random. It reflects emotional investment that is already forming beneath the surface. And when it is acknowledged, even briefly, it tends to deepen rather than disappear, because attention feeds connection. From there, time itself starts to matter. Casual remarks about being free do not stay casual. An offhand comment about a quiet weekend or an open evening gets remembered. It comes back later, reframed as a question. Not directly, just enough to see what space might exist. What is really being tracked is not your schedule. It is when you are unoccupied enough for closeness to feel unforced. People instinctively look for moments where presence can happen naturally without pressure. When someone circles your unclaimed time like this, it is rarely about logistics. It is about finding moments where attention does not have to compete. And when those moments get closer, another subtle change tends to appear that many people overlook. Energy shifts when someone else enters your physical space. A brief touch from someone else. A laugh that lands a little too close. And suddenly, the tone changes. Movement adjusts. Proximity tightens. Nothing is said, but the atmosphere feels different. This is not about jealousy in the dramatic sense. It is about contrast. Attention becomes more focused when it senses competition, even mild, even momentary. The nervous system reacts before words ever do. If you stay present during these moments instead of dismissing them, the pattern becomes clearer, especially when contact itself starts to linger in ways that feel intentional rather than accidental. Sometimes it shows up as an accident that lasts just a second too long. Hands brush while swapping places. A hip bumps into yours while reaching for something. Most people instinctively pull away fast, pretending it did not happen because the moment feels charged. But watch what happens next. Instead of withdrawing, the contact stays. A hand remains resting on your forearm while a sentence finishes. A knee continues touching yours as the conversation moves on. Nothing is acknowledged, but nothing is corrected either. The important part is not the touch itself. It is the lack of urgency to end it. Comfort with contact is rarely accidental. It signals safety, curiosity, and desire operating quietly at the same time, and once physical ease is established, movement begins to synchronize. You leave a place together and head down the street. One of you is clearly walking faster in a rush. But as the conversation settles, the pace slows, not abruptly, not consciously, just enough for steps to line up. Arms drift closer. Hands almost meet. The rhythm changes. This is easy to miss if you are focused on words instead of movement. But people naturally match pace when they want to stay connected longer than necessary. Walking together becomes less about getting somewhere and more about staying aligned, both physically and emotionally. From there, awareness sharpens in a more personal way. Sometimes it slips out as a comment that sounds casual, but is not. You lean in to help with something. You have stood this close before, plenty of times, but this time there is a slight pause before she speaks. Then it comes out. Something about how you smell. Not exaggerated, not dramatic, just stated, almost as if it surprised her too. Scent is tied to closeness, memory, and comfort. It is processed in parts of the brain linked to emotion and attachment. People do not comment on it unless they have already associated it with presence. What matters is what happens after the comment, whether space is created or whether closeness continues, as if the observation opened the door rather than closing it. Individually, none of these moments seem definitive. But attraction rarely relies on single gestures. It builds through repetition, through escalation that stays subtle enough to feel deniable. It grows in layers rather than declarations. And this is usually the point where people talk themselves out of what they are noticing. From a man's perspective, these moments often feel easy to dismiss because nothing explicit has happened yet. There is a tendency to downplay them, to assume kindness or coincidence, to wait for something clearer. But attraction does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it waits to see whether it is met. Recognizing these patterns does not mean forcing anything. It simply means understanding when interest has already been placed on the table quietly and deciding whether to engage with it or let it fade unnoticed. Awareness gives choice, not pressure. Once you start noticing these early shifts, the next thing that usually shows up is confusion, especially when interest is there but warmth suddenly disappears. From a man's perspective, this often feels like mixed signals or distance that does not make sense. The next video breaks down why this happens so often, why attraction can turn into coldness, and what is actually going on underneath, as explained by Dr. Sophia through psychology, emotional regulation, and human attachment dynamics.